What if the most famous writer in human history didn't actually write the works credited to his name? For over 400 years, scholars, historians, and codebreakers have argued over a single question that refuses to die. Who really wrote the greatest plays and poems ever created? In this video, we're going to examine the evidence, expose the contradictions, and confront the mystery that has divided the literary world for centuries. Literature has given us timeless characters, unforgettable lines, and stories that still shape how we think today. But behind one legendary name lies a mystery so deep that it challenges everything we believe about genius, authorship, and history itself. This is not a story about simple doubt or academic debate. This is a story about missing records, secret identities, powerful elites, and a trail of clues hidden inside the texts themselves. Welcome to the world's greatest unsolved literary mystery, a mystery that may never be solved, but demands to be questioned. Before we question the mystery, before we challenge the name attached to it, we have to understand the weight of the works themselves. These are not just old plays or dusty poems preserved in libraries. These are living texts that continue to breathe through modern language, cinema, politics, psychology, and culture. Lines written centuries ago still define how we speak about love, ambition, jealousy, betrayal, power, madness, and death. Entire phrases that feel completely modern were born in these works, shaping everyday speech without most people realizing their origin. What makes these writings extraordinary is not simply their beauty, but their range. Within a single lifetime, the author behind these texts demonstrated an almost impossible command over human experience. From royal courts to taverns, from battlefields to bedrooms, from kings haunted by guilt to fools who speak uncomfortable truths, the characters feel psychologically complete. They think, doubt, manipulate, reflect, and evolve in ways that seem far ahead of their time. This depth is something even modern writers struggle to achieve, yet these works appeared during an era when psychology as a field did not even exist. The stories do more than entertain. They dissect power with surgical precision. They explore political instability, leadership failure, propaganda, and public manipulation. They reveal how crowds can be controlled, how ambition corrupts, and how fear shapes decisions. When you read these texts carefully, it feels less like fiction and more like someone with first-hand experience of court politics, diplomacy, and elite power structures quietly revealing how the system truly works. Then there is the language itself. The vocabulary is vast, precise, and inventive. Thousands of words and expressions appear in these works for the first recorded time. Legal terminology, medical knowledge, nautical references, military strategy, classical philosophy, and foreign cultures are woven seamlessly into dialogue. This is not surface-level familiarity. It is the language of someone deeply educated, widely traveled, and constantly exposed to intellectual circles far beyond the reach of ordinary life in that era. What truly raises eyebrows is how consistently this level of brilliance appears across the entire body of work. These plays were written rapidly, often under pressure, and performed for both common audiences and royal courts. And yet, the quality rarely drops. Comedy, tragedy, history, romance, and philosophical reflection all coexist with astonishing control. The emotional intelligence alone is staggering. Characters understand themselves in moments of self-awareness that feel centuries ahead of their time, speaking internal conflicts in ways that modern audiences still recognize instantly. The global influence of these works is unmatched. They have been translated into every major language, adapted into thousands of films and stage productions, and reimagined across cultures that never shared the original historical context. Political leaders quote them, psychologists analyze them, lawyers reference them. Even artificial intelligence models are trained on their language patterns. Few artistic creations in human history have achieved this level of permanence. And yet, here is where the mystery quietly begins to whisper. When works reach this level of intellectual sophistication, the natural question emerges: what kind of mind produces them? Not just a talented storyteller, but someone with access to elite education, classical literature, foreign languages, legal systems, and intimate knowledge of high society. Someone who understands both the nobility and the underclass, the mechanics of power and the psychology of the individual. These works do not feel accidental. They feel authored by someone who observed the world from multiple layers of society, someone who moved comfortably between privilege and performance, someone who knew how to hide truths in plain sight. And before we even mention the name traditionally attached to them, the works themselves force us to pause and ask whether the story we've been told about their creation truly aligns with the magnitude of what was written to understand why this mystery exists at all. We have to step away from the legendary works and look directly at the man officially credited with creating them. Not the myth, not the iconic portrait hanging in classrooms, but the historical figure as he actually appears in surviving records. Because when historians strip away the reverence and examine the evidence, something deeply unsettling begins to emerge. The accepted author was born in a small market town, far from royal courts and intellectual centers. His family background was modest. His father worked as a glove maker and local official, and while this provided stability, it did not place the family among the educated elite. Records suggest he attended a local grammar school, which would have offered basic instruction in Latin and classical texts, but nothing approaching the extraordinary breadth of knowledge displayed in the works attributed to him. What immediately stands out is how little we truly know about his inner life. There are no surviving letters written in his hand that discuss literature, philosophy, or creative ambition. No drafts of plays, no notebooks filled with ideas. No personal reflections about writing, politics, love, or art, for someone whose words would come to define an entire language. The silence surrounding his intellectual world is deafening. Even more puzzling is his documented behavior during his lifetime. Legal records, business contracts, property disputes, and tax issues survive in abundance. He appears frequently as a businessman, an investor, and a property owner. He pursued financial security with intensity, buying real estate and lending money. Yet in these documents, he never refers to himself as a writer. Not once does he describe his profession as a poet, playwright, or author, even when doing so would have enhanced his reputation. The timeline of his life also raises uncomfortable questions. During periods when the most complex and philosophically rich works were supposedly written, historical records show him involved in routine legal matters, property negotiations, and local disputes. There is no clear explanation of how someone juggling these obligations produced such an immense volume of literary work with such consistency and depth. Then there is the issue of education and experience. The plays demonstrate intimate knowledge of royal protocol, foreign law, aristocratic customs, and European geography. They reveal an understanding of court etiquette that goes far beyond observation from the outside. Yet there is no record of extensive travel abroad, no documentation of court appointments, and no evidence of close relationships with high-ranking political figures who could have provided this access. Perhaps most striking of all is what happens at the end of his life. When he dies, his will survives. It is a detailed document carefully outlining property, furniture, and financial assets. But in this final inventory of his existence, there is no mention of books, manuscripts, unpublished works, or even a library. The greatest writer in history leaves behind no written legacy of his craft, no personal archive, no acknowledgement of the art that supposedly defined his life. Even his burial passes quietly. There is no public outpouring of grief from the literary community, no recorded tributes from fellow writers, no recognition that the world has lost a once-in-a-generation genius. His death seems to go largely unnoticed by the very culture he is said to have transformed. This is not an accusation. It is an observation. The historical record presents a man who appears practical, financially driven, and locally focused. While the works attributed to him reflect a mind deeply immersed in philosophy, global politics, psychology, and elite culture, the gap between the life we can document and the genius we celebrate is not small. It is vast, and it is within this gap that the mystery takes shape. Because if the works are real and their brilliance undeniable, then we are left with a haunting question about whether the man behind the name truly matches the mind behind the words. Every great writer leaves traces behind. Letters to friends, drafts filled with corrections, notebooks cluttered with ideas, arguments about words and meanings, personal reflections scribbled in the margins of books. Even lesser-known writers from the same era left behind fragments of their creative lives. And yet, when historians go searching for this kind of evidence in this case, they find something close to nothing. This absence is not a small gap, it is a vast silence. There are no handwritten manuscripts of the plays, no original drafts showing how famous scenes evolved, no discarded versions of soliloquies, no personal letters discussing the struggle of writing, the pressure of deadlines, or the thrill of success. For a body of work this influential, the lack of physical proof is almost without parallel. Some argue that time simply erased these materials. Fires, decay, neglect, and the chaos of history destroyed them. But this explanation becomes harder to accept when we consider how many documents from the same period survived. Letters from politicians, merchants, scholars, and even minor poets remain preserved in archives. Printing contracts, personal correspondence, and creative drafts from contemporaries still exist. The question becomes uncomfortable. Why did nearly everything connected to this writer's creative process vanish while so much else endured? Even references from other writers are strangely limited. In an age when poets routinely praised, criticized, and attacked one another in print, direct commentary on this author during his lifetime is surprisingly sparse. There are mentions, yes, but they are vague, cautious, and often indirect. There is little sense of personal engagement, little evidence of rivalry, collaboration, or literary debate that one would expect around someone producing works of such magnitude. The publication history raises further questions. Many of the plays were printed only after the author's death, compiled by colleagues who claimed to be preserving his legacy. But these editions were assembled without original manuscripts. They relied on memory, performance versions, and secondhand copies. In some cases, different versions of the same play exist with significant variations, leaving scholars unsure which lines are authentic and which may have been altered, added, or removed. Then there is the signature problem. The few surviving signatures attributed to the author are inconsistent in spelling and form. They do not resemble the polished handwriting one might expect from someone who shaped the English language so masterfully. This has led some researchers to wonder whether writing, at least in the literary sense, was not the central activity of this individual's daily life. The mystery deepens when we examine legal and business documents from the same period. These records are abundant, detailed, and carefully preserved. They show a man deeply involved in contracts, property disputes, and financial transactions. His life as a businessman is well documented. His life as a writer is not. The contrast is stark and difficult to ignore. Even the testimonies of those closest to him offer little clarity. No personal accounts describe watching him write, revise, or read extensively. No stories of late nights spent crafting dialogue or debating philosophy. No recollections of creative obsession. For someone whose works demonstrate such intellectual intensity, the absence of witness testimony feels almost unnatural. What makes this silence even more troubling is the scale of the achievement. These plays did not emerge slowly over decades of careful isolation. They appeared rapidly, consistently, and with extraordinary depth. Such productivity usually leaves behind a trail of evidence, notes, collaborations, corrections, arguments over meaning. Here, that trail seems deliberately erased or never existed at all. Historians are left with an uncomfortable reality. We are asked to accept a towering literary legacy without the usual scaffolding of proof. We have printed texts, performance records, and a name on the title page. But the physical and personal evidence that connects the works to the individual remains almost entirely absent. And in the world of historical investigation, absence itself becomes a form of evidence. Because when something this important leaves behind so little trace, it forces us to question not only what was lost, but whether what we assume ever existed in the way we imagine when doubt enters the story. It doesn't arrive alone. It brings with it a long list of possibilities. If the traditional narrative struggles to explain the origin of these works, then the natural next step is to ask who else, living in that same era, could realistically have written them? Over the centuries, this question has produced an extraordinary cast of alternative candidates, each supported by clues, coincidences, and patterns that refuse to be easily dismissed. One of the most frequently discussed possibilities is that the true author belonged to the educated elite. Many of the plays reveal intimate knowledge of aristocratic life, court politics, foreign diplomacy, and noble customs. These are not the observations of an outsider guessing how power works. They feel lived in, confident, and precise. For this reason, several noblemen have been proposed as the hidden mind behind the works, men who had the education, access, and leisure required to produce such writing but may have had strong reasons to conceal their authorship. In that era, public writing for the stage was often considered improper for aristocrats. Theater was associated with commercial entertainment, not a noble reputation. A member of the elite might have faced political risk, social embarrassment, or even legal consequences if openly linked to public playwriting. Using a pseudonym or a front man would have been a practical solution, allowing the work to reach the stage while protecting the author's status. Other candidates emerge from academic circles. Scholars trained in law, philosophy, rhetoric, and classical literature display precisely the kind of intellectual range found in the texts. Some had documented access to royal courts, foreign travel experience, and multilingual education. When their known writings are compared stylistically to the plays in question, similarities in phrasing, imagery, and thematic obsession begin to surface, fueling further debate. Then there are those with direct connections to theater itself. Playwrights, poets, and translators from the same period who were active, respected, and deeply embedded in the literary world. Some of them disappear mysteriously from the historical record just as these legendary works begin to appear. Others leave behind unfinished or abruptly abandoned projects, leading researchers to wonder whether their creative energy continued under a different name. What makes the alternative candidate theory so compelling is not any single piece of evidence, but the accumulation of small details. Shared metaphors, identical phrasing across unrelated texts, parallel life events reflected symbolically in fictional narratives, knowledge of obscure historical incidents that only a narrow circle of educated insiders would have known. Individually, these details can be dismissed. Together, they form patterns that are difficult to ignore. The debate grows even more intense when cryptic elements within the works are examined. Some researchers believe the texts contain subtle references to the author's true identity, hidden through wordplay, symbolic names, or repeated themes tied to specific families, titles, or historical events. Whether intentional or coincidental, these patterns have inspired generations of codebreakers to search for messages concealed beneath the surface of the dialogue. Critics argue that these theories rely too heavily on coincidence and selective interpretation. They caution against projecting modern expectations onto historical texts. And yet, the persistence of these alternative candidates suggests that the traditional explanation leaves too many questions unanswered. If the mystery were simple, it would not have survived centuries of scholarly scrutiny. What becomes clear is that this is not a fringe debate fueled by conspiracy alone. It has attracted respected historians, legal scholars, and literary analysts who approach the question with serious methodology. Court judges, intelligence analysts, and even former government officials have publicly expressed doubt, lending the discussion a credibility that is hard to dismiss outright. Each alternative candidate brings us closer to a deeper truth, even if none can be proven beyond doubt. They force us to reconsider assumptions about authorship, credit, and historical narrative. They remind us that history is often written for convenience, not completeness, and that the truth sometimes hides behind the most familiar names, waiting for someone to ask the wrong question at the right time. Once suspicion takes hold, readers begin to look at the text differently, not just as stories meant to entertain, but as layered constructions, possibly designed to conceal as much as they reveal. This is where the mystery takes a turn from historical debate into something far more intriguing, because many researchers believe the works themselves may contain clues about their true origin, hidden in plain sight for centuries. The idea is not as far-fetched as it sounds. Writers in that era were deeply familiar with classical traditions of coded writing, acrostics, anagrams, allegory, and symbolic language. Political censorship was real, and expressing certain ideas openly could carry serious consequences. Encryption was not only common, it was often necessary. Diplomats, philosophers, and scholars routinely hid messages within text to protect themselves and their patrons. Within these plays and poems, patterns begin to emerge when examined closely. Certain phrases repeat across unrelated works. Specific metaphors appear again and again, tied to themes of concealment, false appearance, divided identity, and hidden truth. Characters obsess over masks, disguises, mistaken names, and secret loyalties. Entire plots revolve around people pretending to be someone they are not. To some readers, this feels less like coincidence and more like obsession. Some researchers claim to have found acrostic signatures embedded in passages, where the first letters of consecutive lines spell out names or titles associated with alternative authors. Others point to numerical patterns, such as recurring references to specific numbers linked to known ciphers of the period. There are even theories suggesting that the structure of certain sonnets follows encryption systems popular among Renaissance scholars. The most controversial claims involve direct messages encoded within the texts. According to these theories, the author used word placement, spelling variations, and punctuation patterns to signal hidden meanings. When analyzed using period-appropriate cipher techniques, these elements are said to reveal biographical details that do not match the traditional narrative of authorship. Skeptics argue that this kind of analysis invites overinterpretation. Given enough text, patterns can always be found. Human brains are excellent at connecting dots, even when those dots were never meant to be connected. But supporters counter with an important point: the patterns appear consistently across multiple works, using techniques known to exist during that historical period. What adds fuel to the debate is the author's apparent fascination with secrecy itself. Time and again, the texts explore the danger of revealing truth too openly. Characters who speak honestly suffer consequences. Those who hide behind masks survive. Knowledge is portrayed as power, but only when controlled. This recurring philosophy aligns perfectly with the idea of a hidden author operating under a constructed identity. There is also the question of insider knowledge. The works demonstrate familiarity with specific legal cases, court scandals, foreign customs, and political events that were not widely publicized. Some references are so precise that historians believe the author must have had direct access to privileged information. If that access existed, it would strengthen the case for an author embedded within elite circles rather than a public theatrical figure. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of these theories is how self-aware the texts sometimes feel. There are moments where characters speak about being misrepresented, misunderstood, or remembered incorrectly by history. Lines that seem to anticipate future confusion, as if the author knew that their identity would one day be questioned. Whether these hidden messages were intentional or the result of modern imagination remains fiercely debated. But the fact that such interpretations continue to surface centuries later speaks to the unusual density of the writing. These works invite analysis, reanalysis, and obsession. They refuse to sit quietly on the page. If the author truly wished to hide, embedding fragments of truth within fiction would have been both a safeguard and a confession. A way to speak without being heard, to leave behind a trail that only future generations might think to follow at first glance. This mystery can feel like an academic puzzle, a debate reserved for scholars arguing over footnotes and forgotten documents. But the reason this question refuses to disappear is because it reaches far beyond literature. It touches something deeply human: how history assigns credit, how power shapes narratives, and how easily truth can be simplified into a comfortable story. If the traditional account is wrong, even partially, then we are not just misunderstanding an author. We are misunderstanding an entire system that decides whose voices are preserved and whose are hidden. The works at the center of this mystery are taught as symbols of individual genius, yet the possibility of a concealed identity forces us to reconsider whether genius is always allowed to be visible, or whether it sometimes must wear a mask to survive. This debate also challenges how we think about authorship itself. In the modern world, we are obsessed with names, ownership, and personal branding. We want to connect art directly to identity. But in earlier centuries, especially in politically sensitive environments, ideas were often more dangerous than people. Writing could threaten reputations, positions, and even lives. If anonymity offered protection, then hiding behind a public figure would not have been deception. but strategy. The mystery matters because it reveals how fragile historical certainty truly is. So much of what we accept as fact rests on assumptions repeated often enough to feel unquestionable. Over time, repetition hardens into truth, even when the original evidence is thin. This case exposes how easily gaps in the record can be filled with convenience rather than proof. There is also an uncomfortable, emotional dimension to this story. People resist questioning the accepted narrative not because the evidence is overwhelming, but because the myth is comforting. The idea that an ordinary individual rose to unimaginable creative heights is inspiring. It reinforces the belief that genius can emerge anywhere, from any background. Challenging that story can feel like an attack on hope itself. Yet the alternative is not cynicism, it is complex. Acknowledging uncertainty does not diminish the work, it deepens them. Whether written by one person or another, under one name or many, the brilliance remains. What changes is our understanding of the world that produced them. A world where social class, politics, and reputation could dictate how creativity was allowed to exist. This mystery also persists because it invites participation. Unlike many historical questions, this one is not closed. New analyses, digital tools, linguistic software, and archival discoveries continue to reopen the case. Each generation brings new methods and fresh eyes, finding patterns that earlier scholars could not see. The debate evolves, adapts, and refuses to settle. Perhaps most importantly, the question endures because the works themselves encourage it. They teach us to doubt appearances, to question official stories, and to look beneath the surface of accepted truth. They remind us that identity is often constructed and that reality is shaped by who controls the narrative. In the end, this mystery is not about proving a single answer beyond doubt. It is about learning how to live with unanswered questions. It asks us whether we value certainty more than curiosity, and whether we are brave enough to admit that some of history's most powerful truths may remain just out of reach, hidden behind the words we thought we understood as we step back from the evidence, the arguments, and the unanswered questions. One truth becomes impossible to ignore. This mystery has survived not because it lacks investigation, but because it resists certainty. Centuries of scholars have searched for a final answer, and yet the question remains alive, breathing through every performance, every classroom discussion, and every line still quoted today. What makes this mystery so powerful is not the possibility that history got a name wrong, but the realization that history itself is fragile. Records disappear. Narratives harden. Assumptions become facts simply because they are repeated long enough. And once that happens, questioning them feels dangerous, even heretical. This mystery reminds us that doubt is not the enemy of truth, but often its beginning. The works at the center of this debate do not lose their brilliance no matter who wrote them. If anything, the uncertainty adds another layer of depth. Every soliloquy about identity, every line about disguise, every meditation on truth and illusion suddenly feels more personal, more deliberate. The words themselves seem to challenge us, daring us to look beyond what we are told and listen more carefully to what is actually being said. Perhaps that is why this question still matters. Not because we expect a final revelation, but because the mystery forces us to think differently about authorship, power, and memory. It asks us to consider how many voices in history were hidden, renamed, or erased to make the past easier to explain. It reminds us that genius does not always announce itself, and that sometimes it survives only by wearing someone else's name. In the end, this may be a mystery that was never meant to be solved. Or perhaps it was designed to be discovered slowly, piece by piece, by those willing to question what they inherit. Either way, the legacy endures, the words remain. The stories continue to shape how we think, speak, and understand ourselves. And as long as those words are read, performed, and debated, the question will never truly die, because the greatest literary mystery in the world is not just about who wrote these works, but about how much of history we are still willing to question once the book appears to be closed.